1965, in Selma, Alabama, a group of black citizens received less than full cooperation in their effort to register as voters. Their leader, Reverend C.T. Vivian, found the sheriff and his deputies in front of him. In 1965, however, the United States government was behind him. The quest for civil liberties was not over, but it had come a long way.
If we're wrong, why don't you arrest us?
Why don't you get out in front of the camera and go on?
It's not a matter of being in front of the camera. It's a matter of facing your sheriff and facing your judge. We're willing to be beaten for democracy, and you misuse democracy in the street. You beat people bloody in order that they will not have the privilege to vote. You beat me in the side and then hide your blows.
Well, go on.
No, I don't need to leave. We have come to register to vote. And you must realize that this is a national issue. It's not a Selma issue. It's not an Alabama issue. This is a national issue. Whenever anyone does not have the right to vote, then every man is hurt. I am hurt because these people cannot register. You are the sheriff of this county because they're not registered. And that's one reason you don't want them to register, because you would no longer be able to use your brutality on them. You would no longer be able to keep people down. And you know they'd vote you out of office because you have not properly represented this office, especially as this true where Negroes are concerned. And all they're asking is to be in out of the rain. And what you want to do is stop them from even being in out of the rain. This is a means of harassment, and you know it.
The federal injunction provides the entrance around there.
All right. Now, the entrance of this courthouse, it did not specify a particular entrance.
It did.
And no, it did not. No, it does not. It does not. I've read it, too. It does not specify, and you are breaking the injunction by not allowing these people to come inside this courthouse and wait.
Well,
this courthouse does not belong to Sheriff Clark. This courthouse belongs to the people of Dallas County, and these are the people of Dallas County, and they have come to register. And you know this within your own heart, Sheriff Clark. You're not as evil a man as you act. You know in your heart what is right. You just refuse to do it because you want these people behind you. And as sheriff of this county, if you're deeply concerned, you will go call the registrar rather than keep people from standing inside. What you're really trying to do is intimidate these people, and by making them stand in the raid, keep them from registering to vote. And this is the kind of violation of the Constitution, the violation of the court order, the violation of decent citizenship. You can turn your back on me, but you cannot turn your back upon the idea of justice. You can turn your back now and you can keep the club in your hand, but you cannot beat down justice. And we will register to vote because as citizens of these United States, we have the right to do it. If they were white citizens, you would not have them standing in the rain. You know this. The problem is the matter of your segregation policy. If it was anywhere else, this would be it. I'm a screwball for justice. I'm a screwball for the right for people to vote. And if this is the kind of screwball I am, this is the kind of screwball that America needs. The kind of screwballs that can get rid of Sheriff Clarks who beat people in the street and who keep people from registering to vote. The kind of screwball, if you will, that will get rid of the attempts you make to keep people from registering to vote. Believe me, there were those that followed Hitler, like you blindly follow this Sheriff Clark, who didn't think their day would come. But they also were pulled into courtrooms, and they were also given their death sentences. You're not this bad a racist, but you're a racist in the same way that Hitler was a racist. And you're blindly following a man that's leading you down a road that's going to bring you into federal court. You may laugh at today because you don't know what else to do. You've got to laugh because you don't know what else to do. There was a day you would beat me instead of laugh, wouldn't it? There was a day you'd arrest everybody and say, well, we took care of that. But the day of your criminal activity is just about over, gentlemen, and you're going to have to provide by the means of law and order for everyone in this nation. Whether you live in Selma, Alabama, or whether you live in San Francisco, California. It's a matter of having to abide by law and order.
Reverend Vivian, it is an honor to have the opportunity to visit with you briefly about your pioneering personal efforts in the struggle to end racial segregation and advance the principles of equality in public education, voting rights, and access to public accommodation. Your courage and leadership with both the Congress of Racial Equality and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference make you one of the most important figures in movement history. Thank you for being here in Tampa with us today. Before you attended American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville and became a principal leader of the Direct Action Campaign in the South, your first involvement in the Civil Rights Campaign was in Illinois, where your family had moved from Missouri. Could you tell us briefly about your initial experiences in Illinois in the late 1940s?
Everybody thinks that it all began in Montgomery. The dam broke in Montgomery, but there had been a lot of hammering on the dam before. And it says, I had my first nonviolent direct action movement in Peoria, Illinois in 1947.
Could you describe for us the basic differences, as you perceive them, between the characteristics of racial segregation in the North and how you approached that, and the experience once you came south in the 1950s and confronted a culture of racial segregation supported by state law?
Up south, as we now call it, right, also had racism, except that if you moved against it there was already a law designed for you that was in your favor, right? The policeman could not come in and beat you out of a store, but the mores is what was keeping racism going in the North. And remember, the Klan and all of that had been in Indiana, really controlled Indiana, right? And in various places in the North. Now, the thing is that the reaction to that began in trying to find, how do we deal with this? How do you deal not with the law as law, but how do you deal with the mores and make it change, right? Well, is that this is how nonviolence got to be born. And in Chicago, Jim Farmer, through churches now, right? See, the religious entity was always there, right? And religious folk were always involved. Is that most of them were pew members. You see what I mean? They were just members of the church. There were always a few ministers, but very few.
When you were at ABT and later emerged as a leader of the movement in the South, you knew Reverend James Lawson. You worked with all of the people we identify as leaders of the movement, including Dr. King, John Lewis, Bernard Lafayette, Diane Nash, and so many others. But your work with James Farmer began in Illinois in the late 1940s. Could you briefly describe his influence in the Northern Civil Rights Campaign and how that in turn influenced your work in the South later on?
When you look at Jim Farmer, Jim is a person that graduated from seminary, but wouldn't take the final piece, wouldn't take the certificate, because he said that the institution was too racist. He went to work in labor, but he was actually Christian working in labor. Now, what I'm getting at is that you have to see that a church then supported him and backed him, right, to create CORE, right? CORE did the first big time solid group organized attack on racism, racist institutions in a city like Chicago, and it was through restaurants. Here again, what you found is this is where average people had to suffer, and it was average people you were going to have to organize. Material came through the church route, so that a group was organized in Peoria through a white church, right, to deal the same way that he had dealt in Chicago. Is that a group of students, largely white, from Bradley University, right, and 2 or 3 of us that were black were invited in. One of the strategies in particular was that they would go into a restaurant without us, sit at various seats, right, but always leave 1 or 2 seats open, right? And so when we would come, and we were there, and they wouldn't seat us. They'd let you stand, but they wouldn't seat you, see. And then, so these persons that were part of our group, unknown to the management, would begin to invite us over to their seats. And of course, we would say thank you, and we would do it, right? Then, if anybody complained, we call the manager. And the manager would have to deal with the fact, does he want to lose this white business in order to include 2 or 3 minorities, or does he want to bend to it? We began to all work together to change that situation. And it was really a test of nonviolence north. Our idea was to reach the conscience out. That's the great power of nonviolence, right? Because ultimately, that's where it is, right? Until there's a change in the will to do right, you will really have the ultimate change that you need. We did it in Peoria, right?
As you took your experience in Chicago and Peoria south, what was on your mind as the early Southern movement took shape?
This is why I love Martin King so. This is because Martin kept that ball rolling up the hill for 15 years, 17, right? Closer to it, right? 1955 to 1968, right? As we moved into the South, Jim Farmer was trying to do it inside of organizations like the NAACP, right? He had been an influence, and he'd involved himself in most of the organizations that fought for civil rights, all right? Before he ever did the action that we've now mentioned, right? That's when he got the church to support him and back him. I think that what Jim did made a lot of organizational people that had real influence across the country realize that this was it. Not do anything about it at the time, but realize it, that seeds were being planted, right? And seeds were being planted by any number of young people across the country, like a group of students at the University of Illinois that couldn't get their hair cut. And so they fought against that. And they partially won, partially lost, right? But things were happening. And I think we have to see that as very, very important. It's just like we see the importance of the church in things that we didn't necessarily think was there. When we started to move in Montgomery and won it, the North began to have demonstrations all across the North, right? The major cities in the North went into demonstrations because this is what they wanted, a method that worked. What we have to see is the importance of Martin King was not that he could speak, was as important as that was. What was important that he had a new strategy and made it work. And that strategy allowed us to really be free as we would actively become free.
As a law professor, I have always been inspired by your view of the responsibility of the law and lawyers in the struggle to advance the fundamental constitutional rights that were at stake, as the South fought to preserve racial segregation in the courtroom and violently outside the courtroom. Could you share your feelings about the role of the law and your strong agreement with historians, including legal historians, that the movement itself challenged the law to embrace the full extent of its commitment to racial equality?
The conflict between states' rights and the Constitution, backed by Southern political power, is what kept us in bondage in the South in particular. We had the laws in the North, it was custom and tradition. In the South, it was legal based upon states' rights. Very important that we really broke it, had to do that. It could not be broken legally because of political power. That's when we had to turn to nonviolence. That's when Martin comes on the scene. That's when nonviolence comes on the scene. When America refused to fight for its own Constitution. It was American black nonviolence that had to salvage our own legal system. Make it work, right? Now, we were bombed. Fred Shuttlesworth is the best example I know. His church was bombed twice, right? Fred was beaten in the streets. The whole Southern legal process that ended always with stick violence, club violence, all right, was called law, right? Now, the thing is, we fought against all of that. That was absolutely necessary to see, to understand the meaning of the movement, why it existed at all. And that had the lawyers done their job, had the legal system done its job, had the Supreme Court did its job, we would not have had to move on it as we did. Because you have to see Martin King's method was to reach the conscience, because American law is based upon American religion. That's why cheap religion creates cheap law, right? And good religion creates good law, right? Because in the final analysis, it's a moral and spiritual judgment, right? As well as a legal judgment to live up to great ideals, of which is basic to law, right? When it's properly dealt with, all right? Is always worth suffering for. And that, and without that, but so many of the lawyers and the establishment didn't want to lose dollars. The issue was never dollars. The issue is dignity. The issue is self-worth. The issue is the sacredness of human personality. All right, and that's the end. That's the hopeful end result and concern of both law and movement. And in fact, most of the great laws on the books for common people were based upon the worth of mankind, religious, spiritual, social issues, and insights and understandings. And if we don't start there, the law becomes unworthy.